I think that it would probably be appropriate to say that this conversation is going to have to do with sexual assault and manipulation and other crappy things that people do sometimes, especially in local music scenes. And so, if you are sensitive to that, I would suggest skipping this and maybe going and making yourself a nice cup of tea instead. Or do both if you think you'll be okay. A good cup of tea is a good companion for almost any activity. Okay. I will start. So this past week, it was sort of widely publicized that a well-known figure in our community had been doing some really crappy things. And I had said to the group that I would like to touch on it. I don't think we're not going to talk about this particular individual. It's more going to be speaking to specifically mine and Jana's experiences in the local music scene, or, we come from different backgrounds. Jana comes from more of a classical music background, but it is sort of a pervasive issue. And yeah, I think sexual assault is something that is common in all realms, but there's something about musicians where they can get put on this pedestal, and it's, you have to, as a community, be able to check these people. Because there are plenty of people who don't do these things that make just as good of music, if not better. So, yeah, I think that's where I would like to start, is just saying, like, when we get out of this conversation going forward, the actionable step is hold your friends accountable and do not be friends with people who do crappy things. Anybody else? Jana, do you have any thoughts generally before we get into specifics?
Well, it's a tough topic to breach, and I'm kind of sheltered from the music scene in general. I was obviously in a music community because of school, I guess, through my college career, but I am lucky that I haven't dealt with any kind of sexual assault, but physical assault has happened to me from actually the first chair of the UWM orchestra when I was still going to school there in my undergrad. And because he lied about it, he kind of ruined my reputation, and a lot of people shunned me through the end of that year, and just called me a liar. So it was kind of doubly bad. Not only did I have a black eye from him throwing me down the stairs, but the bigger hurt was people not listening to me, and making me feel even more ashamed. And I think it is really important to listen to people that have gone through shit and give support, because that traumatized me for sure. It was a rough experience to go through, and it was all because he used his status and his standing in order to produce that lie about me. In small claims, because I had a CT scan for my head because I had a concussion, I had to take him to court for my $1,800 Dr. Bill, and before he fled back to Brazil, he was just crying, saying, "I'm sorry that I had to lie. I couldn't have people thinking that I beat women." But yeah.
It's, I don't know, to me it's crazy that he seemed more concerned about his reputation than that he had done this shitty thing. He, he wasn't like, oh, I feel bad because I threw someone down the stairs. It was like, I feel bad because I got caught and then I lied about it and I couldn't have people finding out that I did this shitty thing. It's like,
yeah, he told people I fell down the stairs and was going to be vindictive about it and try to lie and tell people that he threw me. And I couldn't even fathom that lie of how anyone could think that I was that hateful that I would spread a lie about someone. So, me with a black eye and a goose egg on my forehead, and I'm trying to tell just even my peers within my music school, and I was just like avoided and shunned, and found out that people were calling me a liar, and I didn't know where it was coming from until Small Claims, when he admitted that he made this up about me. Yeah. It's I think it's better now than it was. That was 12 years ago. I think, where the culture has gotten more accepting of victims and supporting victims, but it's always hard to go through. And so the more support you have from the community, I think the better, and the more people take responsibility if they do awful things like this, the better.
Did you win in Small Claims?
Yeah, and he fled to Brazil to avoid paying it. So I never got that $1,800 that I sued him for.
That's,
I'm sorry to hear that, Jan.
That's okay. It was a long time ago, and I'm happy to share my story now, at least. But I mean, when I found out that people had bought into this lie, it just really cut off a lot of ties that I would have had, I think, going out of college. So I talked to hardly anybody from my undergrad, and I really do think that had a lot to do with it, was his ability to manipulate my reputation like that.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's this combination of, like, his reputation as being, like, a good musician, first chair, and then, like, going and trying to trash yours, where people put him up on this pedestal, and, like, just, I don't know what it is about people thinking that, like, because you're talented, you can't be a bad person.
It was crazy. Like, and even the staff didn't really know what to think. I remember talking to the conductor at the time, and she didn't really want to get involved. Even the person whose house it was at was faculty, and she refused to go to Small Claims Court with me, even though she's the one that placed the call for the ambulance. And she placed the call to my friend, who picked me up, and we went to the hospital. So there wasn't an ambulance involved, but she did call my friend for me, and she was taking care of me while I was, like, throwing up in her sink. She was keeping him out of her house because he was trying to get back in to apologize to me. But she wanted nothing to do with it. She's like, don't get me involved in this. And that was another just really disheartening feeling, like, this woman faculty member was not willing to stand up for me, even in court, because she was scared for her reputation. And I think a lot of people just kind of felt that way. And Tiago, I'm going to say his name, had I think he had a scholarship that he was scared that would have been taken from him if they found out he had actually thrown me down concrete steps. So I think that was part of his motivation to lie about it. But yeah, it was just a really horrible thing for me to go through. And the thing I take out of it is the victims, I think, need to be heard.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that's like going on right now, that with this particular thing that's going on in Milwaukee right now, um, there suddenly these accounts are coming out. I mean, I say suddenly, and what I mean is it's sudden to me. Um, you know, I had never really heard anything about this until now, and now there are like, you know, 6, 7, 8 accounts of people who have come forward, and you know, if I had heard about these things 4 or 5 years ago, and this is it sucks because this is a person that I've met and I knew pretty well, and like when we saw each other in public, it would be like I'm gonna like go and hug this person, and now it's just like if I had known that, I never would have talked to them. I never would have befriended them. I never would have like exchanged numbers with them because like, and I, you know, if the culture were more that people are not afraid to come forward about it and people believed survivors more, then people like this wouldn't get a chance to get so high on this pedestal. And
yeah, I did have a close friend that stuck by my side, but you know, she really didn't want to have attention drawn to her either. She had dated him before I did, like just briefly, and saw his aggression. And so she had no doubt in her mind that he did this. But I mean, and I, you know, I'm glad for her friendship. It was one of the things that kept me sane through my senior semester, last semester. But yeah, I do wish more people had kind of supported me, and yeah, it was a difficult thing, and I'm very supportive of the community that comes around the victim and supports them, or with, like you said, similar victims sharing their stories. Really, I think, important, and it's something I wish I would have had the courage to do a little bit more of in my last semester. And I was just so humiliated that I wanted to disappear at the time. So I think that's important for people not to feel like that.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to talk about the intersection between music or any real creative endeavor and how that can sort of play into having abusive, manipulative people. And I think that any time that you have a dynamic where there is an older, more experienced, more successful person, and then lots of younger people who want to come up in what, you know, whatever endeavor it is, you know, this could be commercial banking. It doesn't have to be music. But I think there's, you know, that dynamic is something where you can very easily get into situations where people can get away with these things because of, like I said before, the reputation thing. The younger, less experienced person is like, I can't come forward again. No one will believe me. And then I think when you add the creative stuff on top of it, then you have this sort of like separate entity of their body of work, right? So, you know,
it opens up a whole new thing. You know, you've got this vulnerability with showing your art, with hoping that something will come of it, and being taken advantage of in a way that, maybe people might even consider like as a trade, like, oh, if I give into this person, maybe it'll get my music rolling a little faster. And it is definitely like a victim scenario. I think being taken advantage of in any capacity is wrong. But when you add that element of vulnerability with showing your art and hoping that it'll get out there and get out there quicker with the right connections, it's something that young artists and young business people, whatever thread you're in, it's something to definitely be aware of.
Yeah, I've been really lucky to come up in, sort of the more grungy side of the music scene with people who really cared about my well-being, not only in musical terms, but also just sort of generally. And, I have been shielded from a lot of stuff because a lot of the connections that I initially made were shielded by having another, young person with me, but it was a young guy. And so we would go into a situation where it wouldn't necessarily be just like me and some producer. It was like me and my guy friend and this producer. And so, I always felt much safer with that. And it's something that I never put a ton of thought into in any situations until we started playing shows at bars. And then, you really open yourself up to, anyone can walk into any bar where you're playing music. And so it's no longer, okay, I can look online and vet this studio we're going to and see like if they have a decent reputation. I know what neighborhood they're in. If you're playing a bar on Brady Street in Milwaukee, you don't know who's going to walk in there. And you don't know like what like 45-year-old like hairy knuckled creep is going to come in there and say some creepy shit to you. And so I don't know. I think that there are all these situations where if I had been alone in those places, I would have felt a lot more in danger. And there were times that I did, even with having someone with me, or even multiple people with me.
Good point too. Musicians put themselves, you have to. If you're doing gigs and things, it's generally going to be after 9. It's going to be alcohol around, and people drinking. And so there's that element too. When people kind of have a beer or two and inhibitions get lowered, it's I guess important to keep your wits about you and just kind of always kind of be aware of people and their intentions. I grew up, my undergrad was a lot of just going to bars and having to turn down guys. So having that skill is already one thing, but when you're putting yourself on display as a musician in a band, there's a lot more attention being drawn to you. And so then I think it's doubly important for males and females just to be aware of their surroundings and aware of the people that they're with, and to develop strong connections with people that you do know that want to make sure you're safe and you want to make sure they're safe. I think that's really important too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for guys to realize, that this is not just a women's problem either. That I think that there's just, not only is it not helpful to women who are survivors of sexual assault, also, doesn't help men who are survivors, because then they feel like something's wrong with them or they're lesser than, because like this doesn't happen to men, and it does. It's not something that is just completely relegated to women. And I think that oftentimes you see that adds another element just on top of everything else that keeps survivors from coming out, speaking up, is they're just, there's, whether we like it or not, there's sort of this like gay panic stigma that is still around and pervasive. And there's, the sort of toxic belief that this doesn't happen to men. So I think it's like, I don't know. I think that it's important for men to be a part of this conversation. It's part of why I, didn't want this conversation, like I wanted Shane and Brett to be part of this conversation, not necessarily, like I to participate at whatever capacity they felt comfortable in, because I think it's important for guys to at least listen in these conversations.
Yeah, a lot of the people that spread those lies about me or helped Tiago cover himself were males that played alongside him in the orchestra. And it was just confusing to me as to why they would cover him up like that, and be so quick to pass judgment on me. But I think it is a super common thing for victims just to be silenced and to feel not only violated, but humiliated. And so I'm glad that the Me Too movement kind of came around, because I think it gave people more confidence to speak up and to know that it wasn't their fault that stuff like that happened to them, and to have other people come forward with them, because there's always strength in numbers. But even if you feel alone and hurting after doing this, I think it's really important to get it out there, so that A, it doesn't happen to more people down the line, and B, so that you're not scarred long term with this like feeling that you didn't do enough, which is kind of how I felt for a really long time.
Do you guys think that there's a way to like rehabilitate the perpetrator without just totally throwing them away?
It's a really good question.
I think like I don't think this gets talked about too much, because up until the Me Too movement, I don't think there was as much, like, people weren't comfortable sharing their stories. So now that people are more comfortable sharing their stories, you can see, oh, this person is behaving really bad, or terribly, depending on whether it's depending on like the severity of what's happening.
I think my short answer to that would be taking responsibility, like apologizing and admitting where you went wrong is going to be the best thing that you can do. I can't imagine being in the headspace of someone that would want to attack or take advantage of someone else. But for the people that do end up in that situation, maybe if it wasn't even intentional, I think the best thing that they can do is take responsibility and apologize and own up to what they did and vow to change their behavior. And if they're not willing to take responsibility for it or own up to it, then I don't think that there's a whole lot of room for redemption when you attack someone else.
I'll add to that. I guess what Jana said is definitely the most important step and the first step that should be taken. I think the second part is accepting that people are under no obligation to accept your apology. And I think that might be the hardest part. Having dealt with an abusive person in my life, one of the things that they had a really hard time. And this is someone that I now have a somewhat strained relationship with, but, it's, I don't want to get into too many details, but there is still a relationship there. It's not the same as it was before. I don't think it ever will be the same as it was before. But what happened was he apologized, and then he got really frustrated because I wasn't acting like nothing was wrong anymore. I was not acting like nothing was wrong after he apologized. And if I could go back in time to when he was actively being, frustrated with me about that, what I would tell him would probably be that I was under no obligation to accept his apology in the first place. And him getting mad about it was not helping his case, and it wasn't helping me. So it was not going to get any better, him getting frustrated over me not accepting the apology. And so I think that's probably, I don't know, maybe equally as hard as the first part.
Yeah, I think that's part of what you have to take responsibility for, is the fact that you have damaged a relationship. And
whatever consequences happen are going to happen. And you have to, that's your cross to bear at that point. You are the one who transgressed, go ahead.
I feel like that there definitely should be an element of therapy if you're some type of perpetrator, because, you're going to have to
deal with the stain on your reputation, assuming it comes out.
Well, not necessarily that. You're going to need different tools depending on how much of a habit you had with treating people badly. If this is going on for a long time, it might take a while to develop different just strategies for either interacting with people or whatever the situation is,
or even understanding what patterns were
right.
Yeah,
or how you're getting into it. And then I think they're part of the therapy, it should deal with this fact that what Gabby's bringing up, because you can see where someone would think that, oh, I apologize, so everything's all good now, right? But it's not. And then there's like this element of like, well, what now? And it's like, if you don't have anyone guiding you through the process of how to deal with the other person being like, thanks for the apology, but like, you're still a piece of shit or whatever, that might, I could see where some people might be like, well, I apologize and it didn't work, so fuck it. Like, I don't want to, like, whatever. But yeah, I would say there definitely needs to be therapy for the perpetrators.
And I think it goes without saying that there should be resources for the other end of it too. Receivers of abuse.
Yeah. I mean, like most people hear about people that have had traumas and they're trying to use therapy to unpack their traumas. But when you're a perpetrator, that's your own trauma as well. And I don't know how many people look at when they're like the one enacting that they see it as their own trauma. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a totally different kind, but it's still relevant.
And I think that, like, a lot of people who are perpetrators were at one point victims of some sort of violence as well.
Sure.
For the most part, that sort of behavior does not just manifest out of thin air. And so, yeah, I mean, like, if anyone has heard me talk, they know that I'm an advocate for therapy for everyone. I think even if you are the most stable person in the world, there are things that you can benefit from just having someone to check in with who's completely unbiased, a third party.
And I'm also in the therapy for everyone boat. I've been in therapy since 2012 with the same therapist. And it's, even if there's nothing happening in your life, I like the regularity of having, like Gabby said, an unbiased person to just talk to on a regular basis. When I'm not going through any particularly trying times or desperate times, I'll knock my therapy back to like once every other week or something like that. But what helps to me is being in therapy long term and regularly. You don't have to. A lot of times, if you go to see a therapist, you have to kind of catch them up on your whole life up until that point. And it's like if I have depression, so if I'm going through a particularly terrible time through depression, or if someone has some type of isolated trauma that they're dealing with, and they go and they get tools to help them deal with that, and then they stop for a year or something like that, and then something else re-triggers it, then they're going to have to spend sessions catching the therapist up on everything that's happened, and instead of kind of getting right into it.
I've gone on and off too to therapy, but I would advocate for it in the sense that talking about whatever's going on in your head to an unbiased person who will kind of disappear after you see them too. Like, it's not like it's kind of different than telling your friend or telling your relative, because you like run into them places and they're not bound by an actual, restricted code of confidentiality. So when you talk to someone that has taken that responsibility to be objective and to be confidential, it's like, I feel like your brain actually does rewire itself by getting the thought, like by expressing it verbally. Like, I don't know how the science behind it, but it feels different. And I feel like it's made a practical influence on my life when I have gone to therapy, because otherwise it just sits in your head and again, I don't know the scientific terms, but I feel like it grows and it like rots. And if you get it out, if you're afraid of talking to someone, that's totally understandable. That is the benefit of seeing, I think, a therapist, because you can get it out and not worry about seeing them places and being triggered again, or then telling people.
Yeah.
I think in conclusion for this conversation, I asked one of my friends who I really respect a lot about what her thoughts were on this whole situation. And she knows, she knows the scene pretty intimately. And I think it's interesting because she's not a musician. And so I think she has this sort of outsider's perspective that I very much appreciate in specifically in this situation. And this is what she said to me. She said that her thoughts are that the worst dudes are not going to be awful to everyone they know. They're usually just awful to their victim. Some of the funnest, coolest, nicest seeming people are abusers, and it's our responsibility to check our friends. And that creeps might seem talented, but they're ruining the scene and not worth propping up. And I think that sums up nicely actually how I feel, which is that they might not act like an ass to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're probably, how many times do you see news reports where they interview people who knew someone who did something terrible and they say, I never would have thought this person would have done something like this. And it's because people who are like that don't, if you're awful to everyone in your life, then you're not going to be able to, get anywhere that you want to go. And
especially to the places that a lot of people are in order to enact these horrible things on people. So, yeah.
And then the second part is that when things like this do surface, that it's your responsibility to check those people and keep them, from continuing that, continuing to be an asshole, continuing to victimize people. And then the third point of, especially in creative places, someone's good work is not worth propping them up if they're a bad person. And, I sort of touched on this earlier about separating the art from the artist. And I personally think that that's stupid. Because by supporting the art, you are supporting the artist.
And on the flip side, as a victim, your art is never worth compromising your own integrity, ever.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Like we talked earlier about how as a young musician, you might look up to someone and they might offer to help you with whatever you're doing. And if they turn out to be an abuser, it is absolutely not worth anything, any benefit, your music, your craft, whatever it is. It's not worth the trauma for you. And yeah, I think that's my ending point, is we really need to, believe survivors, and once we find out, because survivors are generally believed, these stories will come out more readily, and we can actually root people out that are doing these things. So that was a really super heavy topic, and I would like to thank everybody.
We'll be later with future podcasts.
I would like to thank everyone in the group for bearing with me. I just think it's important to talk about.